Debian 13 released a few days ago, and I know I'm a bit late with this video, but also Debian sticks around for like 2 years, so I think we're fine. The usual mantra is stable, not old, and Debian 13 definitely still adheres to all of that. We're gonna take a look at everything new in there, but also at why it is absolutely relevant as a Linux desktop, because that's what we talk about on this channel, but also for whom it might not be the right choice as a desktop. And of course, we're also going to talk about our sponsor, Proton Mail. Now, you all know who Proton is, or who they are basically. They make an end-to-end and zero-access encrypted suite of services. You've got, of course, Proton Mail, but your free Proton Mail account also gives you access to cloud storage, to contacts, to your calendar, to your password manager, and a bunch of other tools with the same account. It's all encrypted, it's all log-free, you have all the tools you need to counter phishing and spams, you can create email aliases, all the privacy options are there. I personally use Proton Mail for all my personal communications. I really like what they're doing. They have a Linux client as well for the mail application. It's just a really solid proposition. And if you like privacy, if you like security, there are fewer options than you think, and Proton is definitely my favorite one out of all of them. So they've been sponsoring the channel for, I think, 2 years now. The link, as usual, is in the description. Now on to Debian 13, and the first new thing is that they do support a new architecture. Well, a new architecture for Debian. It is RISC V. They only support the 64-bit variant of that architecture, because 32-bit would just be a hell of a lot of time to compile packages for. It is already slow enough as it is to compile stuff on 32-bit, and on RISC V it's even slower because you don't have super powerful machines to do that work. So 64-bit only right now. Although it seems like 98% of packages are compiled for RISC V, which is not bad at all. Now, their wiki gives some instructions to set up the Debian 13 port for RISC V on a bunch of popular RISC V boards. Now, the second thing will be the underpinnings of the system. Obviously, it's 2 years of development on Debian 12, so you can expect a bunch of updates. First, you get a newer kernel, version 6.12, which is definitely not the latest one. It is an LTS kernel, so you wouldn't have expected 6.16 or 6.17 RC like Ubuntu is doing, but it's still a big jump from 6.1, which was what Debian Bookworm used. You'll also notice that you jumped in a lot of versions in terms of desktop environments. Here I'm running the GNOME build. It is running on Wayland by default on Debian with version 48. You have a lot of changes. If you're coming from a GNOME desktop on Debian, you were using GNOME 43, so that's 5 entirely new versions that you're getting in there, which is a lot. Now, a quick list of what you'll be getting in there. First, a lot better performance and fewer resource usage, because GNOME is optimizing with every new release. You also get the Activities button, which also represents your current workspace and the ones around it. You have new camera indicators when you're using your camera. There are new applications like the Loop image viewer. You have headless remote login using GDM. You have much better settings, much better accessibility as well. You have experimental variable refresh rate. You've got HDR if your display supports it. You've got accent colors. You've got triple buffering, and a lot better Wayland support as well, which is why probably Debian uses it as the default on GNOME 48. So if you are a GNOME user and you use Debian 12, Debian 13 will bring you into a whole new world of computing, and it is, at the time Debian is releasing, the latest available version of GNOME, so you're not even skipping a version. Which is not the case for KDE though, because Debian 13 comes with Plasma 6.3, not the latest 6.4. It is still a giant leap. Debian 12 used 5.27, so you're jumping Plasma 6, 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3. You're not getting 6.4 because it released a bit too late into Debian 13's development cycle. 6.3 is still perfectly fine. This is the one I use on my own computer right now. I haven't performed the upgrade to 6.4 just yet, so it works. It is really nice. It is a very stable system. It has a lot better performance than 5.27, a lot better Wayland support, a bunch of cool features added. It is a very solid platform to stay on for the next 2 and something years. Obviously, you also get XFC 4.20, LXQ 2.1, LXD 13. Those don't evolve fast, so you do have the latest versions of most of those. Now, on the drivers side of things, it's not as good. The Mesa drivers are obviously not the very latest, but they are solid enough. The NVIDIA drivers, though, they are a problem. They're stuck on 550 on Debian 13, and we are on 570 right now with a beta coming for a newer update as well. Those NVIDIA drivers have moved forward a lot in recent years. Wayland support is much better, X-Wayland support is much better, fewer bugs in games but also in 3D apps, better OpenCL support, generally just better Linux support as a whole, and also the move to the open source modules. Debian being stuck on 550 is not great. As always, you can add a repo or compile those drivers. Well, not compile them, but install them manually. But you're breaking the whole this is a unified package that has been tested together sort of thing that Debian brings. So you can change some components, but the more you change, the less stable you are. And at that point, you're probably better off using something newer. Now, in terms of the features, you also now have HTTP boot, which is good because it means you can now boot the entire live session or the Debian installer with just a URL. You can store that ISO anywhere you want, and if you use a computer or a virtual machine that has a UEFI that supports HTTP boot, then you will be able to just type in the URL to this ISO and you'll be able to launch the installer for Debian or the entire live session without having to burn a drive for every single computer you want to install on. Pretty useful for system administrators, probably not extremely useful for regular users, but it's still a cool feature to have. Now, not a new feature, but the removal of a feature in Debian 13 is the end of 32-bit system support. Now, don't worry, all the packages are still built, well, all relevant packages are still built for 32-bit as well. So if you run a 64-bit system and you do need some older or just some 32-bit versions of libraries, for example, for gaming or Steam or other things, you do still have access to that. But you will not be able to boot Debian 13 on a pure 32-bit system. There are no 32-bit kernels on Debian 13. The system just will not work on this older architecture. It is normal and expected, and that's a move that will happen or has already happened for most distributions out there. 32-bit systems, I think the latest one for x86 was an Intel Core Duo, not a Core 2 Duo, a Core Duo. So that's like early 2000s, I think. It's normal to ditch them. I do like the fact that they're still compiling the 32-bit packages though, because these are still insanely useful, and getting rid of them right now would be a big problem for a lot of applications. One thing that is a new feature for Debian 13 is the use of apt3. It released in April 25, we've already seen it in an Ubuntu release at least, but it is a much better version of apt than the previous one. First, there is color coding everywhere, so everything you install is green, everything you want to remove is red, etc, etc. You now have columns as well for everything, and the package solver is much better at identifying the actual stuff you will install and the stuff that is optional and could be suggested or useful. The auto remove part is also a bit more aggressive to really remove the stuff that is currently unused. It should solve a bunch of dependency related issues, and generally just apt3 is a big cool update to Debian. After all, the main strength of using Debian is its gigantic repository system and using apt as the tool to access that. So any change on this will be very useful. Do remember that while I'm showing the desktop here, Debian is really a server system. It is really used mostly on servers, even though you can absolutely use it on a desktop. Most people run Debian on a server, and so having a nice visual interface to add, remove, and sift through and sort and fix packages is really good. Now you'll also have another command that you might want to run if you upgrade from Debian 12 to Debian 13, but this is also on a fresh Debian 13 install, and it still asks me to run it on this. Basically what it does is it replaces the older .list files that contain the repos that you have added onto your system. It converts it into .sources files, and it also attributes a specific key to every specific file and repo, which is better for security. Ubuntu did that, I think, 2 releases earlier. Debian now has it. If you perform the upgrade from Debian 12 to 13, you will have to run that command to make sure everything is up to snuff. But as you can see, on a fresh new install, it also has a list to modernize. So you'll have to run it if you want. It's not mandatory, they're not forcing you to do it, but I think it's just better for security. But there's also a change on how temporary files are handled on Debian 13. They're still in the /tmp directory, obviously, but this is actually a temp fs file system, tmpfs, which means it is all loaded into RAM, not written to disk, and it is a lot faster, and also by default it will delete everything when you reboot. This is the new default in Debian 13. All the temporary files will be removed with each reboot. Now, if you're migrating from an older version of Debian, your temporary files will be kept for a certain number of days. I think it's 10 days for what used to be in /tmp, and it's 30 days for what is in /var/tmp. After that, everything is automatically deleted after each reboot. Obviously, you can configure that with a good old config file, and obviously you'll have control over this. But if you do have some scripts or some stuff that relies on files stored in /tmp for maybe more than a few hours or a few days, or if you regularly reboot your systems, then do note that this is a change and you might have to adapt your workflow or your scripts around that as well. Now, there are other things, this one goes over my head, I'm no security expert, but Debian 13 implements mitigations for return-oriented programming exploits and call jump-oriented programming attacks. You also get a 64-bit time ABI, meaning that the dates beyond 2038 will be supported on Debian 13, so you should avoid having issues in the long run. You also have HTTP 3 support in curl, and when you install curl, you also get wcurl by default. Of course, Debian also upgrades packages all across their repos. There are 14,000 new packages, but you did lose 8,800 of old, unmaintained or obsolete packages, and 44,000 packages have been updated to a newer version as well. As usual, Debian has probably one of the biggest package repositories out there. If you don't count the AUR, I'm talking about like a distro-specific package repo, not something user contributed. Debian is huge. They have a lot of stuff. It's not necessarily the latest version, but all of it is really well maintained and really well tested. This is one of the main advantages of running Debian, and obviously they're moving forward with that advantage and updating everything to this newest release. Now, since my channel is mostly Linux desktop focused, is Debian 13 a good option for a Linux desktop? And my answer is yes and no. Yeah, I know, it's not a really good answer, but yes and no. Yes, because currently Debian 13 is almost current. Sure, it has some older drivers, it uses an LTS kernel, but if your system runs well with this kernel and these drivers, you don't really need to update to something new. You could get better performance, but it's absolutely not mandatory if your main focus is stability and using a well-tested system that will just not die on you. And yes, Debian 13 is also a good choice because older apps in the repos don't really matter nowadays. If you can get by with the version Debian 13 gives you of a specific app in their repos, then you're good to go. You don't need something new. If you do need something newer, you have Flatpak support baked in, but you can also run an app image. You can also run a snap package. So you can have the latest version of the app that you absolutely need the latest version of, but you can also just get the stable, well-tested versions for everything where the latest changes and features don't really matter to you. You have the best of both worlds, and it really works well. It makes Debian entirely suited for a desktop experience. Of course, you could also add various third-party repos, but then you're entering that destabilizing your system sort of territory, because these repos will come with library updates as well, which might break the well-tested environment that Debian 13 builds. I would heavily recommend that if you run Debian as a desktop and you need the latest version of an app, you use a Flatpak or an app image or a snap and not a third-party repo, because this will install newer version of libraries and this will definitely hurt the general stability of Debian. On the other hand, Debian is not really a good system for a Linux desktop in a few cases. First, if you're an NVIDIA user. If you're an NVIDIA user on Linux, the drivers 550 are not as good as the 560 or 570. You want the latest NVIDIA drivers if your GPU supports that on Linux, because every version fixes actually important problems. These are problematic drivers and you need the latest version. Granted, you could also install them manually yourself or add them through a third-party repo, but this will break Debian's well-tested environment, and so at that point you might as well just run something newer instead of Debian itself. So for NVIDIA users, I would say Debian is not the right choice. If you have very recent hardware, the kernel 6.12 LTS might run on your system, you might have all your hardware supported, but you're not gonna get the latest bug fixes, the best performance and everything. If you have really recent hardware, don't run Debian on it, but I think everyone knows that. It's not meant to be run on a computer you purchased today or this year with like a very recent AMD GPU, a very recent AMD CPU. It's just not meant to run on that. Now, if you're a gamer, I would probably also not run Debian. You can absolutely install Steam on Debian, even the Steam Flatpak, and just run your games. It's gonna work, but you don't have the latest drivers, you don't have the latest Mesa drivers either, meaning you don't have the latest Vulkan support, and Linux gaming is heavily dependent on Vulkan. Running on an older version of Vulkan really deprives you of a bunch of bug fixes and improvements. You'll be better off with something newer if you're planning to game. It's not impossible, it could work, but you're gonna have a better time with a more recent distro than Debian 13. Now, I personally would have said I would never use Debian 13 as a desktop myself, because I do look at newer stuff all the time, I like to use recent stuff, but when I looked at my system as I was recording this, I use Tuxedo OS. It's based on Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, and it's running Plasma 6.3 and the Linux kernel 6.11. So I'm actually not running anything newer than what Debian 13 offers, and my package repos are probably offering about the same versions. So honestly, yes, I could absolutely see myself daily driving Debian as my main system on that laptop. Now, all my gaming is done on another computer, which I would not run Debian 13 on. And also, my laptop uses an NVIDIA GPU, and Tuxedo OS gives me 570 when Debian would give me 550. So I'm not going to move to Debian, but it's not that far off. And yeah, Flatpak, snaps, and the likes have just made that app old age problem completely irrelevant, which is cool. So that's it for my look at Debian as a desktop. There are a bunch of updates in there. Obviously, if you do any kind of development work, you have much newer versions than in Debian 12. My own server that I use for my podcast, the Linux and Open Source News Show, which I completely forgot to publish last Saturday, by the way. Maybe I should have checked Mastodon or something. Probably people told me that I didn't, but I didn't look. So it's now live. So that server runs Debian 12. I will upgrade it to Debian 13 in time as well when migration scripts are released and ready for YunoHost and Castopod, which are the tools I use to manage this specific server. So I do run Debian. I would not personally run it on my system, although it is not far off, honestly. And at the point where the NVIDIA drivers will be fully open source and work well, I will probably move to a Debian-based system as the thing I use daily, because it just works. So this will conclude today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll leave you in the capable hands of our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. I mentioned them in passing during this video. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. You can use their own distro, which is Tuxedo OS, but you can use Ubuntu-based ones, or you can just install any distro you want, and they do provide third-party repos for certain distros to add a few customizations here and there to make sure all the hardware features like light bars and the performance key and stuff like that work properly. I only use their computers these days. Everything you see here for me is made on one of their laptops, the Infinity Book Pro 16 with an NVIDIA GPU, and all my gaming is done on one of their desktops, the Tuxedo Cube. They're really solid. The link, as usual, is in the description. They've been sponsoring the channel for like 3 or 4 years by now. They are just a really good option for a Linux computer. Now, thanks for watching. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons are, where you should click them. The comment section is in here as well. You know how it works. Thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye.